What's going on, everybody? Wilson here, your spiritual hype man. Super happy to be back. Happy New Year. Hope you enjoyed the last episode, the kickoff to season 3. And super excited for what we got coming up. We have a ton of guests scheduled and still being scheduled at the moment. So, yeah, there's going to be quite a few people, definitely quite a few stories to tell. And definitely a bunch of different things that have happened since the December, end of November, December, January. Lots of things happening, so lots of things to touch base on. But at the end of the day, if you didn't listen to the last episode of season 3, episode 1 kickoff, I'd recommend you can listen to it. But I feel like I'd love to give you a macro overview of what it is, because thinking about it, like all the things that we're currently going through, positive things, I don't want to say negative, but just more of learning aspects or learning situations really could boil down to what the last episode talked about. And throughout the seasons, throughout the years that we've been on podcasting, it's really just that. And I feel like the biggest concept to understand and to reinforce is that really nothing changes until you do. And that okay, so I'm just going to give you the macro overview of what the talk was about. And this is really the framework. And the more we speak on it, the more we podcast on it, the more we listen to other people's stories, it really, you can really start identifying the things or the framework. And the framework ultimately is, life. Okay, so the way I did it was like really just the macro truths, and the macro truths to the point of what we deem as society to be true, right? So the first one was emotion. So at the end of everything that we do, no matter whatever decision we take or make, that decision is set out to attain a feeling that we're looking to achieve. And that feeling usually is on the good side and right side of things, right? Most, like I would say 90% of the time, unless but even so, like even just some, the thing that jumps to mind is like if someone that likes to be smacked around a little bit during intimate moments, like they still want that because it makes them feel good, right? So the emotional part, I think, is the ultimate, when you boil everything down, is the ultimate driver of what makes us do the things that we do. The second macro truth would be then time, right? As far as what we know time to be, and how we measure time is 365 days in a year, 24 hours in a day. So ultimately you just, everybody on earth, every human being has the same amount of time would be the second truth, right? So then that being said, then the next truth is really how much time do we have left as human beings. And so the latest research in 2023, I think it was 2023, so not so latest. I would assume it's probably a little bit more now because more people are doing less and less of the things that negatively impact the body and probably longevity. But since 2023, it was 2023, I believe, was the test. I'll have to double check that, but 2023, 24, 25 maybe. The longevity of a human being for females was 81.5, and for males it was 76.3. So what I had, what I had us do in the talk was just take your biological age and subtract that number from from the CDC's life expectancy. And again, for some people, like for people that are younger in biological age, they had maybe a little bit more time. But for most people that were in the audience, they looked at their number and they were like, oh shit. And so I think that's important to keep those, a couple of those truths aligned and then in front of you, right? So just like thinking about it. And again, not to be morbid, but just more of realistic, like how much life do you have? How many days do you have left? How many hours do you, in essence, have left? And at the talk, quite a few people looked at their number and were like, oh shit. And even a few weeks later, I think that is the biggest thing that stuck with most people was saying like, I want to go enjoy my life, or I want to go do the things that I set out to do, because, I really don't have, 29 years left is not a long time, and I think that's, I think that's the most powerful drive, like one of the most powerful drivers, right? Keeping those things in mind. So that was three. And so again, once you figure that out, then the next logical step would be then to really identify, okay, if I know how much life I have left over, in essence, what is life? How do we define life in general? And obviously there's a lot of things inside that, as far as, things we do or how we see life. And, there was quite a few people, that just labeled life as having fun or enjoying yourself or being present, things like that. And all that is absolutely true. We just got to the most common denominator, or the most macro way of seeing it. And for me, life in general is just an essence of situations and then decisions that we make over time. So I'll give it to you again, just a bunch of situations, an accumulation of situations over time. And in those situations, we make decisions that then bring us to the next outcome, right? So that's what we've talked to, we've talked and we've podcasted and we've had people on the show and just really talk that similar framework. And so in life, if we understand that it's situations and then decisions over time, and that just becomes our life, then the next question would be, okay, what's driving our decisions, right? And that's where we really get into it. Not that we haven't blown your mind already, but that's the next step. That's the next thought, right? And so decision making, and the way we've broke it down and the way we've seen it, is just influence creates thoughts, thoughts create emotion, emotion drive the decision, and the decision then creates your outcome, right? Now the decision can be an action, can be an inaction, doesn't matter. But then that whatever you do in that moment, that decision making point, then you get your outcome. And so in life, right, the time we have left, we're going to have a bunch of other situations, and typically we have situations that are cyclical, right? So based on where we live, what we do, the people we hang out with, your influence, these things that we've sort of set up to be with, within our own, grasp of, our timeline, those things ultimately create cycles, right? Cycles and situational cycles. And so if there's moments or outcomes that you're not happy with, then the question really is, okay, what situation and what decision did I make in those moments that I continue to do, or I did, and I'm not happy with the outcome, meaning I didn't attain that emotion that I'm trying to feel. If it's opposite of the emotion that you're trying to feel. And that, in essence, is just life, life, and how we can start formulating a real defined action towards changing the things that that we're not happy with, right? The situations, the outcomes we're not happy with. And so once we understand that, then it's really identifying those moments and then understanding a few things. I would say the next thing is to really hone in on the emotion, right? Because the emotion is the lever. The emotional lever is what's either pushing you away from the decision or pushing you towards. It's affecting the decision. So the emotion is really the thing that we need to identify first. Like, what am I feeling in that moment before I decide? And then how do I change that? And how do you change that is, again, influence, thoughts, emotion, action. So what are the thoughts, right? What am I thinking? And then where does that come from? And so, a story that happened even just yesterday, and it's, again, almost the end of January. There were things, Patty came back home, she was in Vegas, and, it was fine. Like when picked her up, before she left, we were sort of on this emotional, I don't say turmoil, but definitely lots of things that we needed to continue to work through, right? And certain situations for certain things. But just yesterday, so we were good, and then for some reason, I was in the office, and then she came in, or I had called her, and we just started talking about certain things, and feelings really is what it was. And I don't know how we got to it, but we got to a level where, again, it was very high emotional, and the high emotion set off a repetitive pattern of ours, that we start, sort of getting upset, arguing, and then speaking some things that, like, you wouldn't say to your friend or any person out there. Like, you just say it in a way, and this is, again, not everyone goes through that, but I'm just giving an example of our truths. And so after that happened, the cool off period, I actually wrote down what we talk about. So I wrote down influence, thoughts, emotions, actions equals outcome, and I worked backwards, figured out what the outcome was, and then I identified the emotion. And then that gave me like a clear path, in terms of the thoughts. It's like what made me feel that way based on what she said to me. And so I was then able to later on just approach and then just share those things, right? And then before I even did, she understood. I think she knew that she used a vocabulary word that I actually wrote down, prior to like even sharing with her. I was like, wow, you hit the nail on the head. That's exactly how I was feeling based on what you said. So that means to me that she also knew, right? And she identified the things that she was doing or saying. And so I think from there, there's, once you can do that and you can identify those things, then you can really start facilitating the change. And I think we're on that path a lot better. And so this morning, we were right back to who we are and what we were doing. And there's a couple things that we identified as a couple that, and I think in any relationship, it's important to have, your you time with the person, and then have conversations around the things that, necessarily you don't want to stuff inside and boil down, or wait till it boils up, really. So I would say that was a big aha. And then, because we did it a couple weeks back, we actually had one of our sheets. Actually, I have it right here. It's like, it takes you through a couple of questions, and I'll share some of those questions with you as almost like a framework. But, it's almost like a meeting to get things out and question things. So, for example, the first question on this sheet that we have is, how am I arriving mind, body, and emotion? And so each partner, or each person, whether it's, your loving partner, or your, fill in the person that you're doing this with, gets a moment to really become reflective and in the moment to see how they're coming in mind, body, and emotion. And then from there you go, one personal win for each, one business win, if you're an entrepreneur or a side hustle. And then we go into last week's review action, like what was the last thing that we wanted to do last week. Numbers and money. So, right, you want to talk numbers and money with your closest person, or whoever you're doing it with. So you can really get, you can hone in on that feeling, because I feel like sometimes that's a big driver of emotional tension. Number 4, then we talk a little bit more about business, prospects, pipeline, project systems and marketing for business. And then we go into family, relationships, and fun. So there's a question, needs / frictions, each gets a turn. So what are the needs from each other, and then what are the frictions from each other? So you have an open discussion on the things that, you want to talk about. So, for example, Patty said peace and quiet is her need, and the frictions, she says, to get off her ass. So, it was a good conversation to know, like, maybe there's certain times for me to just back off and just give her peace and quiet, instead of adding, hey, you got to do it this way, or let's do it this way, or being, the driver is really what, if we were to pick our roles, that's who I am. And then, for me, as far as what I said to her, is just alcohol friction, and our kiddo's bathroom situation that he's got to clean the bathroom was really another friction. And so, again, it's just things that you can identify, talk about it in a way that you're not sort of resentful for, or holding it down. And then all of a sudden, when things like that happen, high emotions, and you say some shit that you're like, fuck, I shouldn't have said that. So, and there's a bunch of things. Then you got family, kids, logistics, action items for the following week, parking lot, future ideas, things that we can talk about. And then, next week action item list. So it's a cool framework. And this is what I'm working on. I'm building an app/site that is going to coexist with the ncyd.com website currently, and all these things that I talk about and all these tools that I use are you're gonna have access to. So, and I would say just to finish this episode, the last couple of things that I would identify, and we've talked about this before, just the 3 levels of change, and just to reinforce it, we've broken it down. The framework is really 3 levels, where the first level, you're unaware that, there's change needed, and you're just sort of in the cycle of reactive behavior. The second change is you identify, the things you wake up and you're like, man, I don't like that feeling, or I don't like this feeling after this certain situation, after I make these decisions. Something's got to change. I got to do something different. And that's, welcome to level 2 of your Jedi Mind Master levels of change. And so level 2, you become aware, and now you try to practice and you try to change the decisions. But because it's, because you're so close to 1 and being unaware, you sometimes don't, you don't do it. So like you're aware that you're like in the situation that you need to make a different decision, right? So for me, the example I always say is that there's moments where I was aware that I'm like, this is the moment where you don't freak out and you don't get upset and you don't throw a tantrum and you don't throw shit and you don't put your hands on anybody, et cetera, et cetera. And I identified it, but yet I still did it. So that's level 2. Right. And then level 3 is when you ultimately make that decision. So in those moments, you're like, okay, this is where I don't do this. And then you don't, or this is the moment that I do, and then you do. Right. So it's that actionable item on level 3 where you're aware of it. You make the decision that changes your outcome, and you're like, wow, this feels pretty good. Now I've always said, like, it's once you attain level 3, you don't sustain it right away unless you have that big of an emotional driver that puts you into that level, and then you never do it again. But for most people, you do it and you're like, this feels good. But because you've done level 2, you've done the other action more often and there's less reinforcement of it, you tend to go back and forth between level 2 and level 3 for a while, until there's enough pain or love, which I think is the next caveat, as far as the real 2 emotions that are driving you, to make those actions and make those changes. So you're either moving into love or you're moving away from pain. And I guess the last thing would be, the way you can check yourself and check your own progress in terms of self progress is the longer the time in between the decision you're making in level 2 and level 3 means that you're actually moving in the right direction. And so, for some people, when you make the decision and you do it again after being in level 3 for so long, and now you're back into, level 2 of making that wrong decision, sometimes you fall from it and you don't give yourself grace to know, to look at the things, and you kind of see yourself as like a terrible person or whatever that mental voice in your head is telling you. But I would say grace in cycles was the next. So give yourself some grace. You've been doing X for X amount of years. So, change is ultimately, slow, continuous movements in that direction, and just keep reinforcing, unless there's enough of a emotional driver that you can change, in a day. Again, if a doctor tells you, hey, you're going to die if you keep smoking, if you smoke one more cigarette, you're going to die, then I would assume most people wouldn't, right? But yet people still do. So those are the couple things. So to reinforce and cycles, grace and cycles. Like you'll have your moments, you'll have your cycles of feeling fucking amazing, and then you'll have your cycles of feeling, pretty fucking terrible. So identify what those cycles are, and just let yourself identify that, hey, there's continuous movement, and I've been here before in this cycle. Like I'm not going to be stuck here forever. And then biohack, right? So in those moments of feeling not so great, the best way to get out of that feeling, and sometimes it's hard to just get it started, that initial start, is go do something physical, because ultimately that will make you feel better no matter what's going on in your head. And then you'll sort of stop thinking about the things in your head because you'll start feeling better. So that in essence is the framework. That in essence is the most macro, easiest way to really understand what life is and how you can attain the outcomes you want in life. I appreciate you guys for listening. A couple of updates. We are at 75 countries. So, a couple months ago, we were at 70, 72, 73. But we are currently at 75 countries and 685 cities. And I think that's I want to thank you guys for listening, and I want to thank you guys for sharing. There's been a couple of times that the numbers of people just listening in has skyrocketed, and I can only imagine that's because of you listeners sharing, to your community and sharing to those around you. So I want to say thank you for that. I appreciate you for that, and I look forward to continuing this community legacy thought, concept framework, and just be ready because we got a lot of cool things coming. And so I appreciate you again. Keep crushing it, guys, and don't forget, nothing changes until you do. Peace.